this week. We're kind of going off book. Um, what really bothers me is when we train teachers and the teachers get in the classroom and they don't know how to deal with the behavior in the classroom. It bothers me in that, learning doesn't happen, but also in this day and time, teachers can get hurt, and we don't want teachers getting hurt. We don't want kids getting hurt. So this has been kind of one of my areas of research throughout my career. My first teaching job in a public school, they took the 10 worst behaved special ed kids out of the entire Fort Worth ISD, 70,000 kids. They took the 10 worst kids, bust them to one room, and that was my classroom. So it was kind of a learn by fire type deal. And we dealt with serious, dangerous behaviors every day. So you're not going to have that many in your class, hopefully, but we want everybody to be prepared, and this should go right along with working with students with emotional and behavioral disorders. So we will jump in and get going, and feel free to stop me at any time, ask questions. I'm sure if you've got the question, somebody else that watches this later will have that question as well. So what are serious behaviors? I consider serious behaviors somebody going to get hurt, whether it's a teacher or a kid. I also think it's a serious behavior if the child's going to injure himself. And then finally, a serious behavior if it totally blocks all learning from happening. Certainly all the time there's little behaviors going on that are, some kids aren't learning because they're goofing off, or the kids around them are goofing off. But when it makes a class where it can't happen, I consider that to be serious. There are state and federal initiatives going on. Providing positive behavior supports is certainly a good thing. Reducing harassment and eliminating bullying can certainly help in this area, because sometimes these serious behaviors are in response to a child who's been harassed or been bullied. And certainly promoting safety in our schools is a big deal. We look at all the times that there have been shootings at schools and things like that. We never want to be in a situation like that. So we always want to be looking for ways to have safer schools. Been a lot of research done on behavior, and one of the things that, there are some kind of old school teachers that I've worked with said, if the first time a kid messes up, if you will punish them so bad that they never will mess up again. Well, sounds good, and it might have used to work back in the day, but what we find is that punishing problem behaviors without having a system of supports in place leads to more aggression, more vandalism, more truancy, more tardiness, and eventually dropping out of school altogether. The other big issue that we find is students that do have behavior issues end up with huge gaps in their learning. And these start to show up in the middle school, and then really in the high school years become huge gaps. It works like this. The student doesn't grasp a concept for whatever reason. Maybe they weren't there for the instruction, but they don't grasp the concept. They misbehave. Their misbehavior may be out of frustration for not understanding. It's also, if you're a kid, it's way better to be bad than to be dumb. So sometimes they will misbehave so that their peers don't know that they didn't get it, especially if they're the only one that feels like they didn't get it. So that misbehavior will lead, of course, to a discipline referral. And that discipline referral, my slides have stopped working. That discipline referral will lead to a removal from class, either going to the principal or going to the principal's office. And then after they spend time in the principal's office, then the principal will end up a lot of times either putting them in in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, which of course leads to missing out on instruction. Therefore, they don't grasp the next concept the next time it's taught because they don't have the instruction leading up to that. So why my slides have stopped working is a mystery here. Let's see if we can figure that out. So what do we do with a student who has serious behavior issues? If we can't punish them, if that doesn't work, then what does work? What we want to really look at is that you can manage your classroom. You can do this. You can be successful. I don't want to scare anybody off. You can do it without coercion. You can do it with less stress for yourself. You can do it so that your other kids can have academic achievement. And this academic achievement comes from students who are actively engaged in the learning process. And it all works out for your success as a teacher. You'll feel better about yourself and you'll do a better job. If we break it down into the ABCs I look at are the antecedents, the things that come before the behavior itself, and then the consequences, what comes after the behavior, what they get as a result of that behavior. And these are applicable to all behaviors. You know, we are talking about students with emotional behavior disorders, but these can work for other kids as well. So antecedents, these are the setting events. What happens before the bad behavior happens. And this can be recent, be what happens right before, or it can be what we call, and those are called the direct antecedents, or it can be things that happened earlier in the day. It's the indirect antecedents. So let's say you're a math teacher. You got a kid that walks into class, everything seems okay. You say, all right, turn to page 14 and let's get started. Kid gets his book, he realizes it's upside down, he chunks it across the room and yells out a cuss word. All right, what just happened? Is the kid scared of page 14? This is not something that's a result of that direct antecedent. The direct antecedent was you saying turn to page 14. But what probably happened was things earlier in the day that led up to this blow up. Kid might have got up early, he gets or gotten up late, his alarm clock didn't go off, so he rushes into the kitchen, dumps the last bit of the Fruit Loops into a bowl, and then he goes to dump the milk in it. Oh, the milk is sour, that's nasty, I can't eat this now. Well, he's running out to get to the bus, steps in a mud puddle, gets on the bus, his girlfriend's waiting for him to break up with him, she breaks up with him, and then he comes to school crying, he walks in the cafeteria, and kids start making fun of him, and then he walks into your class, you say, open it to page 14, and he chunks a book. This is a result of indirect antecedents that led to bad behavior. You also, as you're looking at the antecedents, you want to look at the timing, their particular time each day. We've seen the commercials about being hangry. There's something to that. Is this something that's happening at a particular time every day? It could have to do with that. It could be having to do with medication. You want to look at the circumstances that are going on when the child misbehaves. What circumstances would happen? What personnel are there? The adults as well as the students that are around. And then you look for similarities and differences. You're not necessarily trying to find out what's causing the behavior right now. You're just looking for correlations to misbehavior. And then you can start working to eliminate those so that the child can be more successful. One of the big things we need to do is teach procedures. For example, there is no national policy on sharpening pencils. Many times when I was an administrator, I would talk to teachers. They're like, these kids don't even know the rules for sharpening the pencil. Well, what are the rules for sharpening pencils? I don't know the rules for sharpening pencils. Can y'all remember teachers that had particular rules for sharpening pencils? Some have all the pencils sharpened, and when you go in, you just pick up a sharp pencil, leave your unsharpened pencil. Others, you could only sharpen the pencil when the teacher wasn't talking. Some people say, raise your hand if you want to sharpen your pencil. Some say, hey, anytime I'm not talking, it's fine, get up and go sharpen your, every teacher has different rules. Some say, you can't sharpen your pencil in my classroom. You have to have it sharp before you get here, or you're not being responsible. You're going to have to teach that procedure. You say, well, they should already know. How would they know? It's different in first period than it is in second period than it is in third period. So they don't know because there is no national policy. So you need to teach procedures. You teach procedures for handing in papers. You know, I've seen teachers that say, okay, I've got an inbox. You bring your you bring your papers and you put them in the inbox. Others say you pass them up hand over hand. Others say you pass them to the side. Others say, okay, the student of the day will get up and go pick up papers, or the teacher himself will come and pick up papers. So you don't know. I mean, kid going from one class to the next is not going to know if they're not taught. What are the rules for going to the restroom? The school that I'm working in right now just announced, because of the whole COVID thing, when our students come back, the restrooms will be closed during passing period. Well, bummer. You know, I've always wanted my kids to go to the restroom during passing period, so they're not missing my class time to go to the restroom. What are the rules for getting the teacher's attention? Is it a thing where you just raise your hand? And my mother was a teacher, and she would have a green cup that she would tape on the corner of the desk. And then she would put a red, like a solo cup, and then she would put a red solo cup over the top of it. And if everything was going good, you just left the red cup showing. If you needed help, then you took the red cup. I think I've got the colors backwards, but anyway, one color meant that you were good, keep going. The other color meant that you needed help. And she would tell you, you keep working on other things until I get over there. Then what are the rules for lining up? Are we going to go girls first, boys first, girl, boy, go boy? Do you just get up and line up when I say go, or do I dismiss them one by one? You know, all of these different things are procedures that need to be taught directly so that the kids will know. And if you will teach these things at the beginning of the year, it's going to make your life as a teacher so much easier. All right, we've looked at antecedents. Now let's talk about behaviors. Behaviors serve a purpose. They meet a need. They can be changed. And they're often not misunderstood. I'm sorry, they often are misunderstood. They often are not understood. When you ask a kid, why did you do that? I mean, this is what you get. I don't know. I don't know why I did that. Well, you know what? I do things that I don't know why I did it. Sometimes I will be thinking about, you know, if I say that to my wife, she's going to get mad and we're going to have an argument. And then you know what I do? I say it anyway. Why? You know, it'd be so much easier to just not do that. Sometimes I think, man, I'm just the dumbest guy in the world because I do that. But then I think back, Paul, you remember Paul, the guy that wrote like half of the New Testament? He's got a verse in there that says, the things that I would do, I don't do, and the things that I don't want to do, those I do. I call it the do-do verse. You know, it's there in the Bible from the guy that wrote half the New Testament. And, you know, if he was messing up like that, I guess, you know, we get it past too. But just because the kid doesn't know why he did something doesn't mean there wasn't a reason to it. There are reasons for behavior, and they usually fit one of these purposes. Power or control. This is to seek to control an event or situation. Protection, escape, or avoidance. Trying to get out of a situation. To gain attention, to become the focus of a situation, or to discriminate self from the group for a period of time. And then acceptance or affiliation. So these are four of the main purposes of behavior, and everybody has a certain amount of need for some of these. We could talk about some of these. I've got, you know, examples on how much of a control freak you are and those kinds of things, but we won't take the time to do all that tonight. But think about these, and then they have come up with another one that I think kind of fits in the whole power and control thing, but it's revenge is another purpose of behavior sometime. So we won't get too much into that. We'll leave that in the power control part. But think about these four main reasons for behavior. And as a student is acting out, you can kind of start to tell, all right, which one of these is he after? Which one does he need? So when you're observing and reporting behavior, this would be like writing a discipline referral, or when you're trying to figure out why a child is acting a certain way, you want to know about exact specific actions and then the quality of such. You know, if you say something like, he yells all the time. Well, you know, what is yell? Is he actually yelling? I mean, are the decibel levels way up, or is it just, you know, you hear kids all the time say, well, my mom yelled at me. Well, no, she wasn't actually yelling. She was telling you something you didn't like. So you called it yelling. So what's the quality? What's the quantity? You know, how many times do they do it? If you say they never do it or they always do it, no, I mean, it only takes doing something they never do. It only takes doing it one time to make a liar out of you. So you want to be precise. You want to use direct quotes. You want to avoid always and never, and you want to avoid judgment. I am not a cusser. I'm not one that uses cuss words a lot, nearly never. But I always taught my teachers, when a kid says the F word, you know, you don't say kid said the F word. You write out, you know, he said F-U-C-K. You know, you write it out there. And reason is there's a big difference, you know, when a kid says, oh, F this versus F-U-C-K this, there's a difference. And so you want to make sure that you're using direct quotes when you're reporting behaviors. So let's look at some discipline referrals that I've received. Both of these actually were from a teacher that worked for me, who was a math teacher. You know, we'll call him Mr. John. He wrote one time, said, Tommy refuses to do what he is told. He would rather be the class clown. I've got a problem with that. I got several problems with that. How do you know what he would rather be? I mean, have you analyzed his behavior? Have you talked to Tommy and said, Tommy, why do you refuse to do what you're told? And he says, oh, well, I would rather be the class clown. I doubt it. I don't think that's happened. What about Cindy is constantly talking? She's always late and she never does her work. Well, I can rewrite both of those and make them much more effective by making them much more accurate. Tommy failed to complete 3 of the last 5 assignments. He was told 4 times today to stop making faces. All right, so if I'm talking to little Tommy's mommy and say, he never does his work and he'd rather be the class clown. Well, when I say he never does his work, she's going to produce one of his assignments that he's done that I've put a grade on. Yeah, sometimes he does his work. See right here, Mr. John, it's right here. And then I say, he would rather be the class clown. Yeah, you don't like Tommy because you didn't like Tommy's older brother. You know, it's a personality conflict. Well, I can take all that away if I just put right here the data. He failed to complete 3 of the last 5 assignments. He was told 4 times today to stop making faces. What about Cindy? Cindy, who talks all the time and is always late and never does her work, right? Well, she was corrected 4 times today for talking without permission. Pretty hard to argue with that. She's been tardy X number of times this semester, and she's missing 8 of the 12 assignments, right? All of those, it's not a matter of this is my opinion. This is fact. It's written in my grade book. This is factual information that mom and I can deal with. The parent and I can deal with, the administrator and I can deal with, Cindy and I can deal with, rather than making these broad always and never statements. All right, random thought here. Some of the things we can do to help our kiddos. A don't strain my brain day. You know, as a college student, especially how we're operating right now, let's face it, if you really need a day off, if you got a day you just think, man, not today, not happening today. You can do that, right? It's really not gonna, I mean, you don't want to do it too often, but you could get by with that once in a while. Well, kids, normally don't get that option. So sometimes one of the things that I would do is I would give them a pass at the beginning of the semester. A don't strain my brain day pass. Say, okay, on this, you keep this pass, and someday if you just don't feel like working, you hand me that pass, and as long as you sit in class and don't bother anybody, you can read a book or whatever, and you don't have to do the work for that day. You hand me that pass, and you'll get 100 on that assignment. Now, does it really make a huge deal? No, it's really not going to change the kid's grade average all that much at all. But what it does is give him some power to be able to control and knowing that if it's one of those days that I just can't handle it, I have this opportunity. And then I started combining that with a homework pass that would do the same thing. I would give them like 3 per semester. You know, that was self-contained kids that I have for every class. So it's like getting half of one per class per semester. And they had the option of saving these up and raising their grades, or of using them if they just were really having a bad day. There are other kids who you can work out a plan with to have a break signal. You might have that kid that sometimes can get volatile, but if he gets a chance, he can bring things under control. But a lot of times he never gets that chance because we keep pushing. So I've had kids that I'd work with and say, look, I've noticed that sometime when I keep pushing you to do your work that you get mad and then you blow up, and I don't want that happening. So if it's one of those days that you just say like, you know, I need 5 minutes, coach, then when I tell you the second or third time to do your, you know, get out your book and do your work, just, you know, give me a timeout signal. Whatever signal that I invent with that kid. And we want it to be something that not everybody sees, but this kid knows that it's something special between he and I, and then, or him and me, I guess would be accurate. Then I can give that kid the break he needs, let him have 5 minutes to compose himself, rather than keep pushing. He blows up and he's out of the class and he never gets the assignment done because he's missed so much work. Ding dongs. Consequences can be positive or they can be negative. A lot of times when we think about consequence, we only think about negative consequences, but positive consequence can be a very positive thing. Now, what we got to understand is what the professional may see as negative, the child may see as positive. And what's positive for one student may be negative for another student. And what's negative today may be positive tomorrow. So how does this all work? Well, let's say that, let's talk about one of our sons, Mason. When he was in about 4th or 5th grade, was about the time that Mary Kay Letourneau thing was going on. And you may have forgotten about that, but she was a teacher who had an affair with one of her students. So he's in class one day and the teacher walks up behind some student. She's going over to help him and she pats the student on the back, you know, kind teacher type gesture. And it says, ooh, Mary Kay Letourneau. Well, teacher was furious, but all the class laughed. They thought it was hilarious. So the professional saw this as a very negative thing. But if you ask Mason to this day, you know, he's 33 years old now, you ask him to this day, was it worth it? He'll say, yeah, everybody laughed. So what was very negative for the professional was a positive thing for the kid. I don't know what all trouble he got in for it, but it was absolutely worth it because everybody laughed. And we think of what is positive for one student may be negative for another. Let's say you got little Tommy Troublemaker in your class, and little Tommy Troublemaker does something. You say, Tommy, if you do that one more time, you're going to have to stay in from your lunch with me in the classroom today. Little Tommy Troublemaker is terrified. Little Susie Suckup, though, she raises her hand. Can I stay in and have lunch with you? So she would love to get to have lunch with the teacher, where for little Tommy Troublemaker, he would hate to have lunch with the teacher. So what's positive for one student may be negative for another. And then what's negative today may be positive for tomorrow. So little Tommy Troublemaker does mess up again. Teacher says, okay, you've got to stay in here for lunch today. So at lunchtime, all the other kids leave and go to the cafeteria. Tommy gets out his lunch and he opens his lunch up and he's got a sandwich in there, and that's really about all. And the teacher's sitting there watching him, and she kind of starts feeling sorry for him. And, you know, he's through eating and he's sitting there sulking, and she says, you know, Tommy, I got extra ding dong in my lunch. Would you like it? And he says, well, yeah. So she gives him the hostess ding dong, and he takes it back to his seat and he eats it, and he's looking at the teacher and thinking, you know, she's pretty nice actually, and I get an extra dessert if I sit in here and eat with her. And come to think of it, she's kind of pretty, you know. I might kind of like to do this lunch with the teacher thing. So it was supposed to be a very negative thing, but it ends up that the next day when she says, hey, Tommy, if you don't straighten up, you're going to have lunch with me tomorrow. He's like, yeah. So we got to be careful with our consequences, that if we're trying to reduce the behavior, that we make sure that it is a punishing type thing and not something that's rewarding. Oftentimes when a teacher would send a student to my office, they would come back and they would say, the teacher would come back and say, you know, that kid would rather be in your office than in my class. I said, well, that doesn't say much for your class. I mean, if your class is so boring that they would rather be in my office getting in trouble than being in there engaged in learning, then, you know, that's kind of negative on you. Further, when we look at consequences, there are different levels of consequences. They're arbitrary, logical, and natural. Arbitrary consequences they're unrelated to the behavior. They're just things that are made up by other people. Logical consequences is more of a common sense approach where you can show a direct connection between the behavior and the consequence. Now, the natural consequence is what happens without intervention, but oftentimes these are too harsh. Think about when my daughters were little and they'd come in the kitchen and the stove was on. And they'd start reaching up there and you'd say, no, hot, and you could slap their hand. You know, okay, they eventually learn because you slapped their hand. But if you never slap their hand, the first time they come in there and they reach up there and they burn their hand and they got scar tissue for life and all that. Well, they won't do it again. They've learned, but the natural consequences were just too harsh. I also live on a country road where people come flying down here way too fast. So when we'd be out in the yard and my daughters would get over too close to the street or even headed that direction, I'd, you know, go up and get them by their arm and kind of pop them on their little diaper bottom and send them back the correct direction. Well, why do I do that? If I just let natural consequences take over, then, you know, they go out there one time, they get hit by a car, they'll never do that again. Way too harsh. So you don't do that. Natural consequences are a great teacher, but most of the time we can't let them do their thing. So we want to go with natural consequences instead. Let's take a look at it. Think about drinking and driving. An arbitrary consequence for drinking and driving is you get a fine, right? You can't really make a connection there. That's just the way the government works, and it's really hard to see a good connection. The logical consequence is you lose your license. I can logically explain that. If you don't operate a car safely, then you're going to lose your legal ability to operate a car by we take away your license. Now, if we didn't do any of those things, the natural consequence of drinking and driving would be a wreck, an injury, death. Certainly a great teacher, but again, too harsh. It might be the death of the person that's driving, but it may be the death of someone else. We don't want that happening, so we use other consequences instead to try to curtail that behavior. The next random thought, the bounce pass. Whoa, we jumped on past. A bounce pass is, you got a kid that has the wiggles, you got that kind of ADHD kind of kid. If I have that kind of kid and I have a teacher friend down the hall, I might say, hey, I'm gonna send this kid to you with a bounce pass every now and then, just to give him a chance to get up and get the wiggles out. And that's just a pass that I write on it, say, please sign and return, fold it over, staple it. The kid goes down to the teacher's room to deliver this to the child, to the teacher. The teacher opens it up, signs it, staples it back together, hands it to the kid, and says, great, take this back to your teacher now. Well, it gives that kid a chance to get up, go, move around, get the wiggles out, and he also feels like he's done something good. So that's a great random thing that you can do to help kiddos that need to move around a bit. All right, when you're conducting observations, and a lot of times you're going to be observing as the teacher, but sometimes you may need to go in and observe in other situations. When you do that, you want to be as unobtrusive as possible. You're watching for the antecedents, the behaviors, the consequences, and you look for things to verify what you've been told, but you want to come up with your own conclusions. The thing you need to understand is that if you're not the teacher that this kid is with every day, if somebody asks you to come in and watch a kid, just your very presence alters the environment. So be aware of that. When you're working with a kid that has a special ed issue and has different difficulty with behaviors, you want to research, find out what you can about this child. You can look at the cumulative file, you can look at the archives, the report cards, any interviews that have been done with the child, and then you want to find out what you can about the disability. I remember the first kid that I got that had Tourette's syndrome, I thought, man, I don't have a clue about Tourette's. And the mom says, oh, no problem, I got what you need right here. And she handed me a VCR tape of a Jerry Springer show, where Jerry Springer had all these people with Tourette's syndrome on his show. And that was supposed to be my education on this kid. So instead, looking at professional journals, research on the internet, you want to watch which sites you're using, because there's a lot of wacky information out there. You can also learn from other professionals and maybe other districts where the child came from when you're trying to find out about the behaviors. So let's try some of this. We want to look and think about, is the purpose of this behavior for power, for escape, for attention, or acceptance? And you can, hold up 1, 2, 3, or 4, whatever you think, whether it's power, escape, attention, or acceptance. The kid cheats, lies, and uses obscene language, out of seat, off task, skipping class, crying, and tears. Is that kid after power, escape, attention, or acceptance? Got an escape. Abby's not playing. Yeah, this is a kid who's trying to escape. And, you girls are really good at this one, especially with male teachers, because you can walk up to that male teacher and you can, turn on the tears if you're one of those people that can turn on the tears, or you may do that other things like, hey, coach, I've got the, that girl thing going on. So, oh yeah, get out of here. Go, go, go. This is a great escape. Next one. This is a kid that cheats, lies, uses obscene language. Oh, no, now we got it. There's a kid that's exhibiting gang-like behavior, lies, cheats, is the class clown. They may have a reputation for inappropriate sexual behavior, and they join a gang. Power, escape, attention, or acceptance. Got 1 vote for attention. And we're going to see that this is very similar to the attention. The difference here is the joining the gang and the exhibiting gang-like behavior. They're really going for that acceptance. They want to be a part of something bigger. So, but some of these behaviors you're going to see are very much the same. All right, the next one. Argues, has to have the last word, doesn't comply with directions. They're verbally aggressive. They're bullying, forcing peers into submission. They ignore the reprimands of the teacher. Definitely a power play, right? This is a kid that has to have some power. And the last one, whining, creating a disturbance during class, lying, cheating, being the class clown, again, using obscene language, again, the inappropriate sexual behaviors, and having tantrums. This is a kid who's after attention. So you can see it, the attention and the acceptance are very similar, but the whole gang wannabe thing, they're after that whole acceptance. Now that kid that has to have power brings up, don't ever get in a power struggle with a child, but if you do, don't lose. And this is very applicable whether this is your own child or a child at in school. You want to avoid that if at all possible. And I can get out of a power struggle just by saying, you know what, we're not going to talk about this right now, and walk away. And I have maintained the power. We will talk about this later, but now it's not the time. I've maintained the power without having to have that struggle with the child. We need to think about what the child can realistically do. Oftentimes, kids' issues are the result of frustration. Now, probably when y'all were in school, you didn't have a Big Chief tablet. But when I was at school, you had a Big Chief tablet. And the paper on those things was, I mean, it would just tear. You'd start erasing and it would just fall apart. And what they gave us to write with on those were, you know, we all use the number 2 pencils down, but these pencils were bigger. I mean, it's like trying to write with a horse's leg, you know, just big old giant pencil that you had to try to write with. You know, is that realistic? It wasn't realistic for me ever to have good handwriting. And, you know, teachers smack you on their hand with a ruler if your handwriting was bad. I mean, now my hand hurts. Is my handwriting going to be even worse? You know, think about it. What can that child realistically do? If we give a child way more than they can do, it's not realistic, then they're going to be so frustrated. Think about what's fair. I have teachers all the time tell me, well, I'm not doing that for this kid, so I'm not going to do it for that kid because that wouldn't be fair. Well, you know, what's fair? If I know how to do CPR and a kid falls out in my class and I say, well, I'm not doing CPR for that kid because I'm not going to do it for the other kids, that's ridiculous. That has nothing to do with fair. The new definition of fair we need is giving each child what they need. And that might be different for one child to the other. I'm not going to do CPR on all the kids because all the kids don't do it. And when you think about it, schools do some really dumb stuff. You know, I remember about the time I got printing down, they told me, okay, now you can't print anymore. Everything has to be done in longhand. You have to write cursive. Well, I never was very good at that. And then I finally got to where I could do it okay. And then they said, please type. So from then on, everything had to be typewritten. Why did I spend all that time learning cursive? So think about some of the things we do. Don't make a whole lot of sense. We've talked enough about the normal curve, so we'll just skip over that for now. I don't know why my slides are not cooperating. All right. When you're recording behaviors, you can just make a simple form like this, where you're writing down the antecedents, you're writing down the behaviors, you're writing down the consequences. What's the kid getting? Sometimes we think that the problem is the behavior, when really our antecedent is leading to the behavior or the consequence. What they get out of the misbehavior is way more important. Make sure when you're working on these that you include the positive behavior supports. And that is systematic, individualized, research-based practices. It's kind of a prevention approach. We focus on teaching the skills that they need. Some people say, well, that's their parents' job. They should have taught them those skills. Well, yeah, probably, but they didn't. So are you going to let them go on without them, or are you going to teach them what they need? I'm going to teach them what they need. You want to have an emphasis on culturally appropriate practices. Real often I'll see teachers say, you look at me, you look me in the eye when I'm talking to you. Well, some of our children, especially kids from a Hispanic background, I don't want to paint with a broad brush. I know that's not the way with all of them, but many of our Hispanic kids are taught, if you look an adult in the eye, that's being disrespectful. When you're being scolded, you need to look down at the ground. That's the appropriate way. So we want to make sure that when we're working with our kiddos, that we are using culturally appropriate practices. And then we want to teach replacement behaviors. That's an appropriate behavior that replaces a problem behavior, but it needs to serve the same function as that problem behavior. I have had a jillion ADHD kids over the years, and they do this. You know, they pound on the desk with their pen. Well, if I can teach them, see, I'm still pounding, but now I'm pounding on my leg with my pen, just like I was pounding on my desk. Now I'm hitting my leg. You can't hear it. It's serving the same function, but it's not causing a problem. So I have taught them an appropriate replacement behavior that is socially acceptable. I had a kid that loved to play drums on the desk. And I mean, he was really good at it. He would use, you know, part of the desk to be the bass part and part of it to be the snare or whatever. He was really good at drumming, to the point that other kids liked to listen to it. So if I wanted to replace that behavior, would I use an attention-seeking behavior to replace it, or an escape-seeking behavior? Well, he was doing it. He was good at it. Other kids liked it, so they gave him attention as he did it. So what I would start to do is say, hey, Sean, we need to work right now, but if everybody gets their work done, then at 5 minutes before the bell rings, you can do us a concert, okay? So in that way, he got his attention-seeking behavior. He got to play his, you know, desk drum set. The other kids were entertained, and, you know, frankly, so was I. So we want to make sure that that behavior replaces the behavior that they're after. We also need to think about, is it a skill deficit or a performance deficit? A skill deficit says, I don't know what to do. Okay, that's something I can teach that kid what to do. A performance deficit, I know what to do, but I don't want to. Well, that's a behavior issue. Skill deficit, I don't know how. The performance deficit, I know how, but something else is better. I mean, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm having way more fun doing what I'm not supposed to do. Skill deficit, I would if I could. A performance deficit, I could if I would. Skill deficit, I can't do it. A performance deficit, I won't do it. So think about it. If it's a skill deficit, we need to teach that skill. If it's a performance deficit, we need to keep working on that behavior. So when you're looking for intervention, think about which intervention aligns with the function. If they're seeking attention, let's find something where they can get attention in a positive way. Which one is appropriate given the student's needs and ability? Which one directly teaches a target behavior? Which intervention will most likely positively change behavior quickly and easily? And then which one is least likely to produce negative side effects? I was listening to a professor one time, and she was talking about a school that she had visited, and this school had a lot of kids that brought their skateboards to school. And she said that the school, as a result of this, decided that they would tape down the middle of the hallways a lane where kids could ride their skateboard from class to class. And she was remarking on what a great intervention this was, And I'm thinking, y'all are crazy. Somebody's going to get hurt. You know, you've got skateboards flying up and down the hall and all this mess. It is very likely to produce some extremely negative side effects in that somebody get hurt, somebody get run over, skateboarders get in fights because, you know, going the same way, you know, all that mess. So you got to think about when you're coming up with an intervention, is it going to be worse? Is the solution going to be worse than the problem? Then you think about which one has some evidence of effectiveness with the target behavior and which is most acceptable through the team member who was implementing the plan. I was in a meeting one time and they decided that this particular child needed music therapy after lunch to help him calm down. And he really liked Mozart, so his parents got him a cassette tape of Mozart, and it was decided in this IEP team meeting that as soon as he finished his lunch, he was going to go to the nurse's office, and in the back room of the nurse's office, they put a tape recorder with his Mozart tape in it, and he was going to go in there and listen to his Mozart in the nurse's office every day after lunch. Okay, no big deal. Except we had a problem. Nobody bothered to tell the nurse that this was going to happen. So one day the kid walks into her office and he walks back to the back and he starts pushing play on the tape recorder, and Mozart starts blaring out. And the nurse is like, what is going on? Because the day that they had taught him to do all this, the nurse was out and nobody bothered to mention to her what was going to happen. And she said, yeah, we can't have this. There might be sick kids back here. It's going to, at least we got to get him a set of headphones. Well, so you got to make sure that whatever the plan is, that everybody on the team knows about it and it's acceptable, especially to the person who's going to be implementing it, which in this case was the nurse. Then which one of these is going to promote a replacement behavior that will be reinforced in the natural environment, and which one has the most system-wide support? Honestly, whenever I was working with kids with emotional behavior disorders, I didn't have very many kids in my classroom at a time, never more than about 10. So it didn't really matter to me if they raised their hand for attention. I just assumed they said, hey, coach, come here. You know, I was fine with that. But I taught them all to raise their hand to get attention. Why? Because I knew when they got out to other classes, which was what we were working for them to do, is to be able to get out to, you know, real teachers, that in other people's classes, they were going to need to raise their hand to get the teacher's attention without getting in trouble. That had system-wide support. So we want to make sure that we teach behaviors that have system-wide support. We want to teach students the appropriate behavior before problems arise. This might include other students. You know, a lot of times we're reluctant to say, to talk about one student having issues in front of other students, but guess what? They already know. I mean, they've seen this kid misbehave. They know that there are issues. But we want to work on teaching the other students a way to handle that behavior so that nobody gets hurt. And we want to promote replacement behaviors. A good behavior support plan will increase the desired behavior. It might change the antecedents. It might provide positive consequences, and it helps to manage the inappropriate behavior. So as we get into looking at that, or before we get into that, actually, think about this. Where are you as a teacher when the kids are in the hallway? And a lot of people look at this and I mean, this is a typical high school at passing period, pre-COVID, right? Where's the teacher? Well, in my opinion, teachers ought to be standing at their doors, or better yet, be right out in the middle of the hall. You know, we don't want kids thinking that we're scared of them. We don't want them thinking that, oh, I'm going to stand over here, I'm going to stay in my classroom. If we're out there, we can be making relationships with the kiddos and watching and preventing problem behaviors. All right, so let's talk about how we can change behaviors through modifying different ones of the antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. If every day kid comes in, we give a difficult task, the kid wads his paper up and throws it. Teacher says, no, don't do that. All his peers laugh. The function of that, the kid's getting attention. So what can we do to modify the antecedent? Well, instead of giving out a difficult task, we may want to make sure that we teach this, whatever the skill is, to the point that the child feels comfortable with it. It may be, if it's going to be a pretty hard assignment, that we're going to pair up, okay, with your partner. You're going to do this so that the kid is not starting off frustrated and thinking that I need to wad this paper up and throw it because I am not going to be able to do this assignment. So we can modify how difficult the task is or the manner in which it's presented to keep this from happening. How can we modify the consequence? In the past, when we give them a difficult task and the kid throws the paper, then the teacher corrects them and the peers laugh. Well, one thing we can do is we can teach the rest of the class, hey, you know, when little Johnny throws a piece of paper, that's really not that funny. He's taking away your learning time. He's having problems. So let's not laugh about it. If he does that, then let's ignore him, okay? And then when he does well, then we'll give him attention for doing well. So what we've modified is we've modified the consequence, and instead of gaining attention now when he throws a piece of paper, instead of gaining attention of all his peers laughing, they're just going to ignore him so he doesn't gain the attention he wants, and maybe that will modify, maybe by modifying the consequence, he will change his behavior. All right, let's look at teaching a replacement behavior. Hey, look, little Johnny, man, I know when you're given a difficult task that you are frustrated and you just want to wad it up and throw it. I get it, man. Sometimes I just want to throw something too. But next time that I give you a task and you think it's too hard, I don't even want you to look at it. You just take that piece of paper that you think is too hard, you turn it upside down where you don't have to see it, and just put it flat on your desk. And you just sit there. You don't have to do anything else. And then once I get the other kids going, I'm going to come over there and we're going to look at the paper and I'm going to show you how to do it. All right. So I've taught him a replacement behavior where when you get frustrated, you just take that piece of paper, turn it over, lay it flat on your desk. Everything's cool. So we've looked at modifying the task, at modifying the consequence, and at modifying the behavior. All right. So how do we prevent misbehavior in the first place? Well, we've talked about teaching procedures. We also want to make sure that we get and keep their attention with relevant, engaging lessons. Sometimes the reason kids act bad is because they're bored. I mean, I've sat in classes where I'm doing observations of teachers and I've gotten bored. I mean, if I find it boring, and a lot of times you can tell the teacher's bored. I mean, let's face it, you're teaching the same thing, 6 different class periods, it can get boring, you know? So you want to make sure that you get and keep their attention. We have this idea that's called mutually exclusive behaviors. One of those mutually exclusive behaviors is you cannot be on task and off task at the same time. So if they're actively engaged in learning, they can't be misbehaving at the same time. We need to understand the power of relationship. And we do that by building relationship with students. And then we never allow victimization. We don't let any kid pick on another kid or anything like that. Let me tell you about that power of relationship. And I've got that picture of that old Apple mouse cord there because it's relative to this story. I was out of my classroom one time, and this was my class in Fort Worth ISD with, these were really hardcore bad students. 2 of those kiddos, one of them was named Chris and another one named Nick, and they were friends most of the time, but every once in a while they had their issues. And I was out of my class taking some paper somewhere, and I came back and I walked into my classroom, and Nick had pulled this computer mouse off the computer, and he was choking Chris around the neck with it. And he had his knee like in the middle of Chris's back, and he was pulling back so hard that by the time I got in there, Chris's lips were turning blue. I mean, this was a serious situation. The campus monitor had been called because I wasn't available. Campus monitor had been called, and he was this giant, big man. And he was in there grabbing a hold of Nick, trying to get Nick to let go and hollering at Nick to let go. And the more he hollered, the more Nick pulled and pulled and pulled. And it could have gotten really, really scary. So I walked into the class, into this scene. And everybody's looking at me like, what are you going to do? Except Nick, he's looking at, you know, how do I kill Chris? And Chris is not looking at anything anymore. His eyes are rolled over, and he's glazed. He's in serious trouble. And I walked over to Nick, and I got right down in his face, and I looked up in his face, and I said, Nick, it's me. Give me the mouse. And it was the strangest thing. He looked down at his hands like, what am I doing? And he immediately stopped what he was doing, and he wrapped that mouse cord up, and he just handed it to me. Well, this big old giant man of a campus monitor looked at me like, what just happened? I've been trying for 10 minutes to get him to do that, and you walk in and he just hands it to you? Well, what he didn't know is that I had a relationship with Nick. And that relationship with Nick went back to a couple of months before that, when we'd gotten a new kid in our class named Johnny. Johnny was one of the scariest kids I've ever worked with. When Johnny walked into the classroom, his first day there, he went over to the bulletin board and he pulled one of the push pins off the bulletin board. He pulled his earlobe down, he pierced his ear with the push pin, and he said, my name's Johnny, don't nobody mess with me. Well, I reached out my hand to shake Johnny's hand, and he turned my hand like this and dropped that bloody push pin into my hand. Thank you very much. And it was just a matter of days before Chris, the victim in that last story there, ended up getting in a fight with Johnny. And I went over and got between them, and my aide that worked with me got Chris, and she started taking him out of the room. And I went and got in front of Johnny and said, calm down, calm down, calm down. And Johnny says, what, you want some of me? Well, I was oblivious. I thought he was talking to Chris. But Nick, little Nick, realized that he was talking to me. And Nick had been trained in Golden Gloves boxing. He was a trained boxer, and he was actually a really good fighter. And when Johnny says to me, you want some of me, Nick, I don't know where he came from, but he came flying across the room, and he jumped and he landed and like landed Johnny back on the table, flat on his back, and he put his finger in Johnny's face and he says, don't nobody mess with my teacher. So I knew I had a relationship with Nick where I could say to Nick, give me the mouse, and he would do it. You have to understand the power of relationships. And it's hard to build those relationships sometimes, especially if you have a whole lot of kids, but they need to know that you're there and that you care for them and that you're going to get through this with them. All right, so we get their attention. We keep their attention. We teach cooperation. You know, we always want to work with kids in cooperative groups if possible. Well, that was the big thing whenever I was working on my master's and I was teaching that class at Western Hills, was doing cooperative grouping. And so one of the things I did after, you know, talking to everybody, and they said, oh yeah, you got to do groups. I divided my kids into two groups. Well, what I didn't realize is I didn't create two groups. I created two small gangs. I mean, these kids, you know, you divide them up, you have to teach them how to be cooperative sometimes. You teach those compensatory behaviors like we talked about, where instead of beating on the desk, they're going to, you know, beat on their leg and get the same feeling out of it without causing problems. You're going to have to teach social skills. Yeah, mama should have done it. Mama didn't do it. We're going to do it. You got to be consistent. They got to know that day after day after day, you're going to be the same person. Maintain proximity. As a teacher, you're not going to be able to just sit at your desk and maintain proximity. If we were in class, what I'd do at this time is I'd walk around in the class. And it's amazing. You can have somebody over there and they've been playing on their phone all day. But when I start walking over there, all of a sudden that phone goes away and they're just paying such great attention, you know, for the first time. You want to maintain proximity. There's like this halo of good behavior that follows the teacher around. You want to be aware of what's going on in your class. You want to have this idea of what we call with itness, to where you're always aware of what's going on. All right, so how do we de-escalate volatile situations? Well, we use humor. You know, if I've got a relationship, and I'm not talking about biting humor, I'm not talking about sarcasm, I'm talking about humor that's going to help my kids. If I've got a relationship with them where I can joke and kid with them, then a lot of times I can calm them down using humor. You always want to remain calm. You know, sometimes I'd feel like, but on the outside, I would just put my hands in my pockets and I would just be as calm as I can, lower my voice. The louder and the crazier it got in there, the calmer I would be. And they would play off of that. You want to use outside help as a last resort. If the kiddos figure out that you're the kind of teacher that can't control your classroom, you're always having to call for the principal or the assistant principal to come help or somebody else to come help, they're going to take advantage of that. You got to show them, I can do this. I've got it under control. You want to remember that pain is temporary. I mean, no, we don't want anybody getting hurt. But if somebody's going to get hurt in my class, it's going to be me. It's not going to be a kid. I'll get over it. You know, pain is temporary. And then we want to teach and use the 10-second rule. Well, what's the 10-second rule? Well, my kids, the first thing I taught them the very first day of school was the 10-second rule. If I call 10-second rule, my kids had 10 seconds to get out of the classroom. So if there's two kids that are about to get in a fight, I call 10-second rule. Everybody else had 10 seconds to get out of the classroom. I've done a ton of positive things right there by clearing everybody out. One is I've taken away the audience. You know, now these other kids that are about to fight, they don't have to fight to keep from losing face in front of everybody else. There's nobody else for them to not lose face in front of. It also removes the possibility of other people getting hurt. I came into my classroom one time and there's a kid standing up on the table and he's got a chair over his head and he's about to throw the chair. Well, I call 10-second rule so that everybody can clear out so that nobody gets hurt. And I taught them from the very first day, look, if I call 10-second rule, here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk out this hall. You go right over here, take a right, and then the first door on the left is room 269. That's our Content Mastery Center. I've already talked to that teacher. They know to expect you. And you're going to go in there and they have some books over here that you can read. And you just sit there until I come and get you. So I had to teach them, not only do you get out of my classroom, but where do you go? And then I had worked it out with the teachers in room 269 that they knew anytime that the kiddos came in there, they would say, is it a 10-second rule? The kid would say yes. And then they would get the security guy on the radio who would come to make sure everything was all right in my classroom. So use humor, remain calm. Don't rely too much on outside help. Have this 10-second rule in place. Then what do we want to do? Well, we want to divert eye contact. You got two kids that are staring at each other like they're going to fight. Break that eye contact. Do not get up in between them. You're going to get hurt. Get over to the side to where, and then do something, say something to where they both need to look at you, and that breaks their eye contact from each other. We want to use deflection statements. A deflection statement is you take something that they say and you deflect it My best example of this uses not very nice language. I'm going to go ahead and use it. It's nothing you haven't heard before. I have a kid and he says, "Coach, you're an asshole." All right. What kind of asshole am I? I mean, am I a big asshole or am I a little asshole? Well, now the kid has to think. You're a big asshole. Okay. Big, like, I mean, like an elephant big? That big? Or just like big, like, this pencil's bigger than this? What am I doing? I'm deflecting that anger. I'm making them think. You can't operate in the irrational part of your brain at the same time you're operating in the rational part of your brain. Now, is that something that you're going to put up with in a quote normal class? No. Okay. But you can deflect things rather than taking everything so personally, letting them know where all your buttons are and letting them push all your buttons. You just deflect these things that they say. Then we want to use coupling statements. The first time I heard about coupling statements, I thought this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because with a coupling statement, you tell them what they're doing and you tell them what they need to be doing. So my example a while ago of the kid, we'll call him Marvin. Marvin's standing on the table. He's got the chair over his head. He's about to throw it. I've called 10-second rule. Everybody else is out. I say to Marvin, this was literally the first time I tried coupling statements. I said, "Marvin, you have a chair over your head. I need you to put the chair down." Marvin looked up at the chair like it was the first time he realized he had a chair over his head. "Marvin, you have a chair over your head. I need you to put the chair down." And he looked up at the chair and he brought it down. I mean, he still had it in his hand. He still could have thrown it. He still could have hurt somebody. But it was right then I thought, hey, these coupling statements seem to really work. Okay, now, Marvin, you still are holding a chair. I need you to just drop the chair. I reminded him of that a couple of times, and he actually did drop the chair. Okay, Marvin, you're standing on a table. I need you to get off the table. And about that time, he started screaming. So then I went into using rationale statements. Okay, Marvin, when you're screaming and hollering like that, I can't understand what you're saying. I really want to know what you're saying. I really care about what you're saying. So please talk in a lower voice so I can understand what you're saying. So I'm expressing that I care, but I have a good reason, a good rationale for him to lower it a few notches. I also want to watch your body position and your body language. Watch your body position that you're not in a position that you get hurt, but also that you're not in a threatening position. If you're a small lady, then it's not going to be as big of a deal. But I understand, I'm 6'2" almost and way over 200 pounds. I know if I stand up above somebody, it's pretty intimidating, so I want to watch my body position, watch your body language. Now, you can also work with reinforcers. There are a number of different types of reinforcers. A token reinforcer, a token economy is one of the things that we used a lot. And reason that works well is they get points or tokens for good behavior. And then there's a menu of items that they can choose from so they don't get tired of them. Tangible. Of course, you got to worry about everybody's diets and all that, but there you can say, okay, guys, we're going to work today and we'll have ice cream at the end of the day, something like that. Social reinforcers, pat on the back, compliments, all of those type things are social reinforcers. And of course, there are natural reinforcers. I used to be a runner, and I ran so much that if I missed a day of running, then I wouldn't get those endorphins kicking in and all that. And that was a very natural reinforcer. It got to the point that you really counted on and needed that. So those are several types of reinforcers that you can use with your classes. But what makes reinforcers better? Well, immediacy. Hey, man, you did a great job on that paper. Remind me a month from Tuesday, and I'm going to give you a reward for that. What? No. Hey, you did a great job on that paper. here is a, pass for a free ice cream in the cafeteria or something like that next time you go. Frequency. You ever known anybody that uses a word too much? Some of my keys are awesome. Oh, that's awesome, man! You did an awesome job. Oh, that was very awesome. That was awesome. That was an awesome thing to do. Or amazing. Oh, it was amazing. That was amazing. That was It gets old. It gets to the point that it's just used so frequently that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. Enthusiasm. You might want to think about these with how you use them with other people. If I say to my wife, "Oh, you look nice today," that's not going to go very far. If she walks down the stairs and say, "Hey, man, Lisa, you look great today." Okay, my enthusiasm, my eye contact. Well, thanks for being here. I'm glad y'all are here because otherwise I'd be talking to a TV screen. What does it matter? Eye contact. Then description of the behavior. Hey, I really liked how you did this today. I really like how you sat in your chair and you worked hard all through this class period. So you're describing it. And then you have anticipation and variety. One time I came home and I brought my wife some flowers. This was soon after we were married. I brought my wife some flowers and she really messed up because what she said was, "Oh, wow, you brought me a flower. You get points for that." Points? I didn't know there were points. I like points. I mean, I'm a guy. I like points. I didn't know we were working for points. Cool. Okay. So the next week I come in, instead of bringing one flower, I brought 12 flowers. And I say, "Okay, I get 12 points, right?" And she's like, No. You bring me a gift, you get a point. A point. I only get 1 point. Well, I wish I'd have learned that before I bought her a car, thinking I was going to get like 20,000 points. But I didn't know that. And apparently there's this system that you girls know about that we don't know about, but she kind of clued me in on it. But I finally learned a little bit about this system. And I found out that with some anticipation, I can get a lot more bang for my buck, a lot more points. So I would say to her, "Hey, Lisa, how about on Friday, I take you out to," there used to be a restaurant here in Fort Worth that was her favorite. It was called The Keg. And we used to go there before it went out of business. And I say, "Okay, how about on Friday, I take you out to The Keg?" She'd say, "Great." What I found out was I already got a point. I haven't spent a dime yet, but I already got a point because I've asked her out for ahead of time and she gets to anticipate that we're going to go out. And then Friday comes and we actually do go out. I get another point because I actually remembered what we said we were going to do and I actually take her out. And then we go and we spend the same amount of money that we would have spent anyway, but I've got these 2 bonus points already coming in. Then I get the point for taking her out to her favorite restaurant. So I figured out a way that with her system, using these anticipation, that I could get more points for the same amount of money. Now, I also learned if I did that week after week after week, that I stopped getting points for it because it got old. So you want to have some variety in there. Sometimes you have to do something different. Sometimes you have to say, "Hey, Lisa, why don't we go get girl food at La Madeleine? I know you like to sit there by the fire and eat your, whatever kind of salad and that mushroom junk and all that. I'll eat a sandwich. It's fine." Mix it up a bit. So all those things that work for your significant other, they work for kids. You just got to figure it out. There are factors that influence behaviors and some of those we can't change. Environmental factors. My first day as an administrator, walked into the gymnasium full of kids and there's some parents sitting around and one of the parents is wearing this shirt that says, "Don't like my attitude? Dial 1-800-EAT but it wasn't bleeped out. I mean, it was right there. And I thought, you know, when that kid says a curse word in class, she's going to get in trouble for it. But that's what she's grown up with. I mean, mom wears a 1-800-EAT shirt to opening assembly of school day. How can we blame this kid? So there are environmental factors that go on. There are also some cultural norms, depending on which kids you're dealing with. You know, some of them, they may rather be in all kinds of trouble than to lose face among their friends. You can also have some psychiatric issues that are going on that are beyond anything that we can control. There might be mental illness, there might be personality issues. And a lot of it boils down to your tolerance as a teacher. I told you I'm not one who uses curse words, but I'm very tolerant of them because I've heard them. I mean, the kids I've worked with, it was just, no big deal. It was just the way they talk. And certainly we didn't allow that, but if I spent my whole day trying to correct every hell and damn, then we would have never gotten anything done. A lot of it's tolerance factor. I found with many of our teachers that, you got teachers that write discipline referrals all day long. You'll have in a school of 50 teachers, there are going to be 2 or 3 teachers that are responsible for more than half of the discipline referrals. They just can't tolerate any of these misbehaviors, and they end up just really hurting themselves and hurting the kids by worrying about every little one. And then lastly, I'd say, remember why you teach. I mean, y'all are, if you're wanting to be a teacher, it's not because you think you're going to get rich and famous at it. There's a certain altruism to teachers. We feel it's a calling, that we're making a difference in kids' lives. I mean, I'm not teaching this class at Tarleton because I think that I'm going to be rich and famous. I mean, it's pretty sad what we get paid to teach it, but I do it for a number of reasons. One, that's my grandkid right there. And I want my grandkid to have great teachers. So if I can help make y'all better teachers and one of you ends up teaching my grandkid, then great, I've done my job, And if not, then at least you're working with other kids and you're doing a better job. So it's almost a calling. There's an altruism there that we want to make a difference in the world. So I've got my reasons for teaching. Think about what your reasons are. And I would say that, it might be a good idea at some point to write down your reasons for teaching. And then one of these times, whenever you're going along and you get really frustrated, that after you've been teaching for a few years, pull that out, look at your reasons and think why you got into this in the beginning. So that wraps it up. I appreciate y'all being here.